Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today's guest is Kinsey Roberts. Kinsey is a wedding venue owner, podcast host, and podcast educator for women entrepreneurs. Her own show, She Creates Business, which you've probably heard of or also listened to, is consistently seen in the top 200 career podcasts on iTunes. And she loves teaching other wedding pros and creatives how they can make an impact on their business and bottom line by starting their own podcasts. You guys, Kinsey helped me start the Legal Paige podcast. But in addition to podcast education, Kinsey loves sharing her personal journey of starting a wedding venue on her family's private ranch in Colorado. Along with her friend Lindsay Lucas, who I also know, Kinsey supports entrepreneurs in the beginning stages of venue ownership by guiding them through market research, construction, and her favorite part of any business, organization, structure, marketing, and systems. When she's not running Vista View events or hanging out behind a microphone, you will find Kinsey spending every free minute with her sweet family and friends, and maybe a book and a cup of coffee nearby. You guys, I cannot wait to have you all hear from Kinsey about starting a wedding venue from the ground up. I know myself that I've had a lifelong dream of owning a wedding venue, and that many of you are also probably curious about what it's like and how to do it. So I thought it would be best to have the guru come on and tell us the awesome and hard truth about being a wedding venue owner. Alrighty, let's get to this episode with Kinsey Roberts, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Legal Paige podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You guys, I am overjoyed and so excited because my friend Kinsey Roberts is here. Hello, Kinsey.
Hi, Paige. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm so happy you're here. You guys, we're just going to jump into this. I'm going to tell you why I'm obsessed with Kinsey so much. So we met at Creative at Heart in round 8, I believe, in November of 2018. Mm-hmm. Kinsey and I just became friends, hit it off right away. And you will probably recognize her voice because she is the host of the She Creates Business podcast, a podcast for wedding industry professionals. And she just really dives into the nitty gritty business things with people across the United States. I mean, this podcast is huge. So Kinsey, it is a joy to have you on today. And you guys, just also the coolest thing about both of us coming together and chatting on the Legal Paige podcast is Kinsey always helps other wedding industry professionals and entrepreneurs start their own podcasts. And Kinsey helped me start the Legal Paige podcast. So Yay. It's the coolest tying up of a bow, and we're both coming on and talking on my podcast. So Kinsey, I just adore you. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, it's definitely my honor. And I feel so lucky that in round 8, we got placed in the same group, because at first I was like, oh man, I never fit in anywhere. I'm not a wedding planner or a photographer or a calligrapher. And they always separate groups out kind of that way. So you and I both got put in I like to call it a catch-all group at Creative at Heart. It was sort of coaches, educators, kind of, but you do other stuff. And so that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I think we had an amazing group.
It was awesome. I think we were group 10 and just a bunch of miscellaneous people put together, but it was really awesome because we all got to talk about all of these different things and bring different ideas and, ups and downs to the table and talk about them together. So yeah, it was a great group.
Yeah, agreed.
So Kinsey, I introduced you and gave your full intro at the beginning of the episode, but I know you a little bit differently than others do. They probably have heard of you or heard of your podcast, but I know there's a lot more to the Kinsey that I know. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to everybody listening in today.
Sure, I sure will. And thanks again for having me, Paige. I just really appreciate this. I know you work hard on this podcast, so I'm happy to be here. What I do outside of podcasting is first and foremost, I'm a wife and I'm a mom to 2 little boys. I've been married for 10 years and I live on my husband's private family ranch in Colorado. And the reason I mention that, and I know that's in my professional bio, but I mention that because it's an important part of my story as it relates to the wedding industry, because that's where my wedding venue is. I own a wedding venue with my sister-in-law. Her name is Katie. We've been venue owners since 2016, and we opened officially in May of 2017. And that's really where the impetus for actually starting She Creates Business, a podcast for wedding pros, also came from. So it was really kind of a full circle moment. I felt really alone in entrepreneurship, specifically in the wedding industry. I didn't have very many friends because I lived out in the country and I live in a really small rural area. And I really needed some help and some guidance, and I wanted to make some friends in the industry. And so I went to Creative at Heart actually round 5 for the very first time, and finally was able to say, oh my gosh, this is what I should start a podcast about, because I'd been listening to podcasts since 2014 and, had owned the coveted Yeti microphone for a long time, but never did anything with it. I never took it out of its box. And then once I went to that conference for the first time, I met some new people, made some friends in the industry, and I was just so blown away by all of them. And I thought, this is it. This is what I could do. I can interview women in the wedding industry. And so that's kind of my story, as it relates to that. When I'm not, being a wedding professional, podcasting, teaching other podcasters, I am just completely obsessed with my little family. I have amazing siblings. My parents are awesome. And I have a really tight-knit small group of amazing friends. We have like couple friends, and there's, 8 of us. We do family dinners, and it's amazing. It's really, if I'm not anywhere in the wedding industry or working on podcasting, that's what I'm doing. I'm also reading like a nerd.
No, seriously, it's so cool. Every time you talk about this, I'm always like, can I just like be your friend or like be like a part of your family?
Yes.
One day I'm just going to like show up in Colorado and knock on your door and be like, hey, I'm here.
The answer is always yes to you, Paige. Always.
You guys, Kinsey is one of those people that just makes you feel so good when you're around her. She's just, a joy and just a light of, she just shines always. And obviously, she started the She Creates Business podcast, which is, it's like top 200 on iTunes for career podcasts. She's just killing it. And she's interviewed some amazing, amazing professionals in the wedding industry. Yeah. But obviously she has so much more to her. And Kinsey, I think one of the things that you're really niching down in right now is starting a wedding venue.
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to jump on the Legal Paige podcast and really kind of just go with and talk to our listeners. There's so many people out there, and I'm sure some of you listening right now have thought to yourself, since we're in the wedding industry, a lot of us have this thought. I don't know why everyone has it, but we're like, I wonder what it would be like to start a wedding venue. Totally. And we always think it's going to be the coolest thing, and it's going to obviously help our bottom line and yada, yada. But there's a lot to it, right, Kins?
There's a lot to it. Yes, that is truer words were never spoken.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, we can't get into everything, you guys. Kinsey has many different, I think you have tons of avenues and courses, and I think a book maybe or something like that, that potentially will be coming out soon. But just starting a wedding venue 101 is kind of what we're going to get into today for everyone, just so they can kind of start fostering this idea in their mind if it is something that has come up before. And I wanted you to really just dive into the 101. Let's not get into intermediate and advanced and how we actually make this happen, but really just thinking about it from, square one. So I would love for you to just start by talking about where this dream comes from, and then how you can turn that dream into a reality if you're at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to say that, and really I've actually added an additional one, but when we're looking at a 30,000 foot overview of starting a wedding venue, especially now, you mentioned, Paige, and you are 1000% correct, that a lot of wedding vendors have thought about or have, had a little bit of a, kind of a whisper in their ear that they want to start a wedding venue. And it's a bit trendy right now. And I don't mean to sound trite, but it is. It's become really trendy to start a wedding venue, and it can be really fulfilling. But there's sort of 4 main scenarios that you need to think about before you start decorating the getting ready suite and picking out tile for the bathroom. And what we see a lot is, and I say we because I work a lot with Lindsay Lucas. She's a national wedding venue consultant. You know her, Paige. She was also in our group at Creative at Heart.
Yes, Lindsay is the best.
She is the best, like capital all the letters, because she really is. And her and I really have partnered on this kind of venue training because we see eye to eye in everything that we teach. And so the 4 main things that I like to talk about before somebody, like I mentioned, gets started decorating, because that's really where they like to start, right? It's all the fun stuff like, our getting ready suite could look like this, and the tile in our bathroom could be this, and this is where we can hang drapes. And there's actually so many steps that you have to take before you get there, and you will get there. Don't worry. It's very fun. But there's 4 main steps we want to talk about. So first, I want to talk to you about, if you're dreaming of being a venue owner, I want to tell you kind of realistically what you're going to face when it comes to regulations, when it comes to legalities, when it comes to what it actually takes to build a commercial building. Number 2 is finding your location. I have some land buying tips for your listeners. And then really when you're ready to actually start building, and this is what I like to call when you're actually in the game. So you have land, you've gone to a bank, you have funding, and now you're ready to work in construction. And then finally, one of the most important things is the actual structure of your wedding venue business. And recently, I just started talking about this because, as you and I have agreed on, it's very trendy right now to start a wedding venue. And that's true. But here's the thing, and don't let me scare you off of starting a venue. But the reality is, in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of wedding venues are going to close because they're going to be in the red, and they're going to be kind of over their loan, because we see people, taking really high 6-figure, low 7-figure loans because it is so trendy. And, just like all good things must come to an end. There's a lot of funding right now, but that's going to change. I foresee that. I know Lindsay thinks that, and a lot of people are going to start selling. And so we kind of have to think this number 5 is that what are you going to do with your wedding venue if that becomes you? Or, plain and simple, if you want to get out of the business, because it is hard work. It's not, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, as they say. So those are kind of the 5 things that I wanted to share with your audience. And I'll just dive into number 1 is, right now, if you're dreaming of being a venue owner, this is a great place to start. And I know it's not as sexy, but I really want you to start with your state and county regulations. What does it take to build a commercial venue, especially in your county? State, yes, it's important, but your county is really going to be who you're going to work with. So look up your county in your state. What are the regulations for a commercial building? Are there any other wedding venues in your area? You can find all of their information. It's all public information. If they got a loan, that's public information. Their zoning is public information. The licenses that they have is public information. So you can actually go and find all of that on your county websites. You can even just have an informational meeting with like your county assessor and let them know, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. It's not, I'm not taking steps or anything, but I just wanted to find out, like, can I get 30 minutes of your time? Can I get 45 minutes of your time to just get your expertise, hear from you? What might I face? Where can I go? What's the proper documentation? What are good URLs to visit? And what should I be thinking about? It will save you so much time in the long run. And then also you're starting to develop a relationship with your county's office, and you're going to want that because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And then the other thing too is that I'll just quickly say about that is, when it comes to building anything, doesn't mean, and guys, if you built a house, anything, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a wedding venue or even a commercial property, but building a house it can be tiring. It can be exhausting. You are going to run into hiccups. There can be some anxiety about it, and that's okay. Just what I like to say is just recognize that that's going to happen and accept it. And then you're more prepared when it does come up. It's not going to be smooth sailing. And if it is, like, good on you, send me an email because I'm going to, congratulate you and give you a huge hug, but you are going to face some hiccups. And that's just the nature of starting a commercial, brick and mortar business.
Right.
And so, which is what a venue is, Yeah. So anyway, that's what I like to say about that part. There's I don't want to dig in too much to, what your county regulation is because every county is different.
Yeah, they're so different.
They're so different. You're so right. And so I'll just give you 2 examples of what we dealt with at our own venue. So we have a specific water system at our venue. And because we built so long ago, it feels long ago because that was 3 years ago, but it wasn't. But 3 years ago in venue world was quite a while ago, right? And we have a specific water system at our venue that actually a lot of the venues taking out permits now to build in the same county, they're not allowed to have that. And so it's because we were one of the first ones in our county and they didn't really know what to do with us. And so that's something to keep in mind. Yeah. So we were able to plan something a little bit differently. We are also on a ranch and we have some agricultural designations. And so those are some things to think about. But now venues building on even, ranch property in like neighboring counties, they're not able to have the same sort of water system that we have. So that's how fast things can change. So that's just an example.
It's really interesting, like you said, to, of course, like do your research online, but then to go like actually talk to your county assessors, build a relationship with them because laws and regulations change all the time. And yours had already adapted from the time that you had gotten all these permits. And so the updated permits may be totally different in like your water regulations that you have.
You are so right. And a great point to that story is that we had a local venue. They were in a neighboring county, so it was a little bit different for them, but they kept calling us to talk to us about their water because they were kind of running into an issue with the county and getting approved. And I just said, listen, here's what we did, but we really can't help you because number one, we're in a different county, but number two, we did this 3 years ago. And so what stands now is what you're going to have to follow. It's kind of irrelevant what we did. And that's the truth.
Yeah. I love how you just really started out with, you're warming my heart. You're like, start with the legalities and regulations. But that's kind of like, that is such a reality for people that are starting brick and mortar businesses. And I'm glad that you said that little term. Cause I talk about it a lot on the Legal Page podcast. And when I'm like speaking at events or talking to my clients one-on-one, people who are online business owners do not think the same way as brick and mortar business owners. And like, just simply speaking, if you're opening shop, and I call it opening your doors, where you actually have physical doors that you're opening, you have to start here. You have to start with like figuring out what the zoning laws are and what is required of you, what permits you need to get before you can even open those doors. And so I'm just, you can get back into it, Kins, but I just like to think here, like if anyone's listening in and you're like, oh my gosh, a wedding venue sounds like the coolest, most trendiest thing ever that I want to do. And Kinsey, I'm like, okay, I'm going to like raise my hand right now. I've thought about this so many times. I'm just like, oh, this sounds like really cool. And like, I feel like it would be like fun for Marco and I to get into. But then the reality hits and I'm like, this is a lot of work and there's so much that goes into it. And it's just good for people to like have that mentality starting out. Then like you said, like picking out tile in the bathroom, which is still fun.
Which is still fun. Yes. And it can be good. Oh my gosh. I love to think about you and Marco. Oh, so cute. We'll talk about that later. But you're so right. And it's true. And I know I dive into all of these things, but I feel like and I know you said I'm warming your heart, but it's really where you should start because actually while you're doing all of this research and while you're doing all of this kind of pre-work is what I like to call it, you can really decide if venue ownership is for you. And I could not agree with you more, Paige, that when we think about online, when we think about the wedding industry, especially for those of us listening to your podcast, and I know people who listen to my podcast, we just think a lot in terms of, quote, online business. And we do too. And I bring a lot of online strategy to the venue, but it's so different. All of our, one of all of our favorite photographers, Jenna Kutcher, she's a giant in the industry, but it's a hell of a lot different buying a $300 Craigslist camera for Jenna than it was for me to build something that was 30,000 times that cost.
Right.
So, and that's the truth. So we kind of need to balance like what we're hearing from the perspective of online marketing with what it actually means to open up a true brick and mortar business, which is what a wedding venue is. So county regulations, get in touch with your assessor, build a relationship with them. I cannot recommend that enough. It's going to be exhausting sometimes. And honestly, you're going to get annoyed with your assessor's office, but that's okay. They're there for you. They're there to help you. And if you can build a relationship, which is truly what all business is about, it will help you in the long run. So there's that.
I love that. Okay. So what's next?
So really what's next is is the market research portion of your business. So number one, finding your ideal location. If you don't already have property, this will be a longer process, and that's okay. That's no problem at all. I will tell you up front that of course, I've mentioned it a few times, I live on a ranch. We already owned our property. And so that's why us starting a wedding venue was a lot less expensive than it is for most people building a private venue right now, because the property and the land is going to most likely be the most expensive part of your purchase. And that's not true for everyone, depending on what kind of venue you're building, but it's true for a lot of people because land is very expensive. And that, of course, depends on where you're building. So land in Colorado is a lot more expensive than it is in, Mississippi. So you might have a leg up there if you're building in a southern state or something like that, where real estate's a lot cheaper. But anyway, so finding your location and doing some market research, those two things go hand in hand, because market research means, what does the market need right now? And I mean the wedding market. What does the wedding venue market in your area need? What's working? What's popular? What's trending right now? But more importantly, ask yourself this: what's going to be trending in the next 12 to 14 months, maybe even 12 to 18 months, because you have to future forecast why it's going to take you that long to build your venue. So you need to forecast what you think will be trending, what you think is going to be needed in your market. Do that market research, see what other venues are charging, not because you need to charge the same as them. So don't hear what I'm not saying, but you do need to understand what your competition is doing. That's just good business. And you need to understand what's missing, where's a hole, what you can fill. And one thing I will say about this is really important while you're doing this market research about your venue specifically, is that don't think that if you are coming out of the pocket with something that's like never been done and never been seen, that's actually not necessarily a good thing, because there's no proof of concept in your market. And so, if you are like in my area, for instance, I live in a really rural area. So of course we have a wedding barn. That's, kind of makes sense, right? And we were the first one in this area. Now, if I was going to build some very real modern, something that looks like it's supposed to be in Los Angeles, real artsy thing, that would not do well here. There's no proof of concept, and that's not the area that I live in. So, am I thinking about building a second location that's more industrial? Yeah, sure. But, you know what I mean? Like something like artsy and modern that should be like in the streets of Los Angeles.
Totally
that's not really going to do well here. Yeah. So think about that. Don't look at it in terms of copying, because you do want to be unique, but look at it in terms of where is there proof of concept and how can you make it better? So that's what I mean when you're doing market research. You're looking at pricing, looking at, how many weddings are being booked in your area? How busy are people? Is there enough room for you? That's the other thing. If you're in a really, really small area, it's hard to get there and there's just not a lot of tourism happening. Will people want to come? So that's part of your market research. Then what goes hand in hand with that and things that happen at the same time is buying your property, or at least, putting feelers out for property. And this is where I have a few tips for buying land. And Paige, I will give you a link to a land and property buying guide that you can put in the show notes. It's just a PDF, and it'll kind of help. Yeah, it'll kind of help you decide, but I'll just do some real high level tips. So first is that, and really quickly, I sat down with my husband and got these tips. He's an experienced, number one, he's a rancher. Number two, he's an experienced land buyer. So these tips are not just from me. They're from someone more experienced than I am. But
Mr. Roberts as
first,
well.
Number one, set parameters. Yeah. Set parameters before you start looking for property, because you can go way over budget if you think you really need something because you're making an emotional decision. So set parameters before you start looking. So that way you know what you're looking for, and it kind of cuts your research time in half. That includes budget, acreage, meaning how much space do you need, or square footage if you're in town, what realistically will work for you. And I like to say, most importantly, instead of trying to make your business fit the property really needs to fit the business model. So that, again, will help you find property faster. So what's your business model? Again, that goes hand in hand with market research, and then find property that's going to fit that instead of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
That's actually that my mind was just blown a little bit, because I probably would have gone the opposite way, like found a really beautiful piece of property just based on the property and like an emotional buy, versus like actually making a business model first, because essentially you're not buying property just to buy property and like hang out on the property. You're buying the property to run a business. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. Exactly. You're so right. And that's the thing is, and it's okay. There's going to be emotion in it because you're going to be very attached to this business. I promise you that. But it's really hard to look at something and say like, oh, look at it, it has 3 ponds. We could put swans on those ponds. But nobody knows if you even need swans. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and that's kind of a funny example because I like to make you guys laugh. But that's, I think it really illustrates the point is we kind of need to know first what our business is actually going to look like. What's the model? How does it make money before we go out there and say, I need swans on a pond.
Gotcha. I have one question.
Ooh, yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question and interject here?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I'm like, okay, these 2 that you've just been talking about, the like state and county regulations and legalities, and then buying property and market research. I'm like sitting here thinking like those 2 intersect, right? At some point, because what happens if like you're researching like your county, but then you're thinking about buying property in like 3 other different counties? I'm guessing that research with like county regulations and legalities is going to expand into probably your surrounding area, correct?
Absolutely. And that's really where your buying property and market research goes hand in hand. So if you're researching your market and you're going outside of your market and you're looking at other counties and you're kind of seeing what other venues are doing, because like, for instance, that gal who talked to us about her water, I would absolutely look and see what they were doing if I was just now building a venue, because she is in a different county, but it's, an hour away from my house. And so it feels close. And so you will naturally expand out to other towns, but you'll have to find out what works best for you. So that's where your market research will really come into effect, is where you say, oh, so I'm in Garfield County, but actually there's a lot more demand in Pitkin County for XYZ type of venue, for like an industrial venue. And that's where we're going to go. So then you move and you start working within that county.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And one thing I want to say about all of these is this is, kind of back to Lindsay Lucas. And I like to share this because this is a lot, right? It sounds very overwhelming. There's a lot to get down. But one of the cool things about hiring somebody like Lindsay is that she's worked all over the country, and you can just chat with her. If this is something you've kind of been dreaming about and you just want to know that, gosh, is this viable for me? Or where do I even go with these county zoning situations? You can actually just sit down and talk to her because she's a consultant. And, this will save you a lot of money down the road. So you don't do all this research, you don't put all of this sweat equity in and then find out like, oh gosh, I should be in the other county.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I remember, we both agree, Lindsay is like a total genius. Mm-hmm. And I just remember like having this dream and like talking to her about it. And I'll never forget this. I'm pretty sure I can share this because it's like good general knowledge. But one of the things she said, and this is why she's so good, like she's a venue consultant. She does this for a living. And she, like you said, she works all over the country and she knows what's needed and what's not needed. Like she kind of already has this market research in the back of her brain, which is amazing. And she told me, she was like, I just want you to remember, like sometimes if you're just thinking like you want to increase your bottom line, like you want another stream of income, and maybe you want to be more hands off on your business, she was like, I don't know if a venue is like necessarily for you. She goes, what people don't think about is that people build venues all over the country, and then there's no place to stay for people that are coming to the venue.
That's right.
And she was like, you should maybe like look around your area and think about like starting a cool hotel or like a really awesome like cabin property or something that's nearby, because lots of venues do not have places for people to stay. And then they're like traveling. And especially, Kinsey, for you and I in particular, you're in Colorado, I'm in Montana. Things are like farther away. So venues could be like an hour away from a larger town. And then, people who are renting out the venue have to think about transportation for their guests and hotels and where they're going to stay. And like that could all be resolved by just creating like a cabin property or a hotel property very, very near to a venue. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because I wanted to like shout out to Lindsay. I never would have thought of that. And that's why she's so good at what she does.
That's exactly right. And it's so true for us, and that would be a huge consideration for us because we are such a rural area. But here's the caveat for us. We are located in one of the highest, it's not a word, you guys, don't write that down, in one of the highest tourist trafficked areas in the state, because Aspen, Colorado is only 45 minutes away. So that's kind of where we have a boon, right? So if you are just a rural ranch or farm, but you don't have a tourist, like kind of arm to your business like we do, then yeah, you've got a problem. And you could absolutely be looking at something like Lindsay mentioned is, hey, actually, would it be better if you provided lodging? Like, would that be better? Because you still, I could not agree more. And that's why she just has a brain for this stuff. She just gets it.
Potentially, I need to ask Lindsay to like jump on a podcast next.
Seriously, I would. She's amazing. You guys go to the lindsaylugs.com right now. If you're thinking of buying or starting a wedding venue, I just can't say it enough times. But,
okay, so we do market research and we're like thinking about buying a property. Then, okay, say we like do all this and we get the property. Yes. Then what?
Yes. You have your property, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. You're in the game. So now you're ready to start building. What does that look like? Number one, it looks like permits. You have to get all of those from your county. We talked about that. And by the time you get to this stage, you already know what those are. So either you can file for those permits, or you can have your general contractor or your project manager, whoever's managing your construction site, can do that for you. Mm-hmm. You're now going to start working with all the people, your construction team, architects, designers, subcontractors, builders. This is a huge step. It will take some time. There's always delays in construction, and that's okay. But again, building a healthy relationship, a healthy working relationship, especially with your general contractor, with someone who's managing the project so that they are on your side, they know your goals, they can communicate to all of these subcontractors. That's really key, especially to getting things done on time. And like I mentioned, there will be some delays, most likely. There almost always is in any kind of construction. Mm-hmm. But the kicker for us as venue owners is that we really need to understand and build in a buffer for these delays, because you want to start pre-selling your venue before it's done. Right. That is the key to a successful first season. I did not do this for my own venue, in full disclosure, because I came from real estate background and I kind of had, nightmares about it. And also because we had a little bit of a different construction team than most people will have. But I know Lindsay encourages this, and I do too. You want to pre-sell. Like I say, it's the key to a successful first season. And so pre-selling means you have to be on time, right? You don't want to tell someone that they can come and have a May 10th wedding and you're like, it's April 29th and you're not going to be done for 60 days. So there is some things that are out of your control. But again, if you can build those really healthy working relationships with your general contractor or the person managing the construction project and all of the subcontractors, if you do find yourself really coming up to a hard deadline because you did start booking couples, well, now you have this relationship and you can go talk to them and say, listen, we have to be on time for this wedding. What can we do? And they're going to help you problem solve.
Gotcha. Well, mm-hmm. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I've renovated a house. So this doesn't give me the heebie-jeebies as much as it would probably give some people. And if you guys have built a house or some type of property, then you fully understand what Kinsey's talking about. But really, I think the mindset you just need to have here is pre-sell your property, get the event space ready enough. And I'm thinking particularly, Kinsey, of here, I'm not going to call them out, but there's a really phenomenal venue that I am very, very good friends with here in the Missoula and surrounding area in Montana. And they did exactly what you're talking about. And I kind of didn't really think about it until you've just been saying this. A couple of years ago when they started opening, their event space and their venue looked a lot different than what it does today, because they just went with the bare minimum. And then they started they started pre-selling it and making money off of it. And I remember, because you guys also know this, I'm a photographer as well. And I remember brides being like, oh my gosh, we're booked at this venue. And I'm so, so excited because it's brand new and no one's had a wedding there. And it's just going to be mine. And I'm so excited. But Kinsey, they just had basic stuff, the indoor space for Plan B, 2 places for ceremony location sites, and that's it. And now they've got a beautiful outdoor dancing patio and an outdoor bar, and now they have lodging on the site and all of these things. But that came after they did market research for a couple years of bringing in clients and being okay, what do these clients actually want and what do they actually need? And now they sell out like crazy.
Yes, I love that. That's really near and dear to my heart because we did something really similar. We have added stuff since we opened in 2017. And when we started booking couples, we actually didn't, here's an example, we actually did not include tables and chairs, not because we didn't think that was going to be needed, but we wanted to see, well, in this market, are people really wanting something super custom? Do they always want to bring in their own style? And we found out really quickly that that was a question we got asked every single tour. Does this include tables and chairs? Do you have the tables and chairs? Do we have to bring those? So boom, we bought them.
Yeah.
And I like that. And what I call that is more of like a Silicon Valley approach, which is in Silicon Valley, when someone's going to launch a new piece of tech or a new piece of software, they get it out as fast as possible. They don't try to make it perfect. They get it out because they want that client feedback. And that's how they iterate and make things better. So I think his name is Ryan Holmes. He's the founder of Hootsuite, which is a social media scheduling tool. And this is who I learned this from. He said they pushed out Hootsuite so fast because they wanted to get it out, get it in the hands of people so that they could start playing with it, not breaking it. They can't break it, but playing with it and telling them what they needed, telling them what was wrong, telling them what was right. And then they iterated as fast as possible. And that's, how a lot of apparently startups and tech companies do that.
Yeah. And I think just successful businesses in general, like if you just think you know what people want, you're going to be sorely mistaken. And anyway, that's enough about that, but I could go on and on. I just think this is really interesting because it's like, get ready, start building, get it up, get it out to people, and then modify as necessary.
I like that. You really succinctly put that. And the other great thing about this for you as the venue owner is that it really minimizes the amount of money that you have to take out. Mm-hmm. And I think especially because, I mentioned this earlier, that I believe a lot of venues are going to sell or close in the next 3 to 5 years. And it will help. And that's okay. That's not a criticism. I'm not trying to razz people. I just think that that's going to happen. But if that does happen to you, well, you're not going to be upside down on 7 figures. You might only be upside down on, at that point, $300,000 or less. You know what I mean?
Yes. Start small.
Start small. Exactly. And you might find out you don't like being a venue owner. I hope you know that the answer to that question before you start, but you never know. You just don't know. And I think that by starting this way, and Paige really articulated that well, starting this way really opens up your options. And there's something my husband tells me is like, don't ever give up your options when it comes to your business so that you have multiple ways to function.
Truth. And it's like way easier to sell a less expensive venue to people that like want to modify and change it. If you are in a place that you're not feeling this venue ownership and like it's time to like move somewhere else in a different trajectory, but like it's way easier to sell. I mean, we're saying like a $300,000 venue, which probably isn't reality, but if that were the case, like that's way easier to sell than a $1.5 million property in venue.
1000%. It's just like building a spec house. So if you're building a spec house because the goal is to sell that house, you're not going to customize it with, cowboy poles in the kitchen because that's not everybody's taste. You build a spec house to make it appealing to a broad general audience. And that's what you can do with your venue as well. It's more appealing to a broad general audience when you're not trying to like squeeze every last dollar out of it because, well, you took out, a $2.9 million loan.
Okay. Well, we both agree on that. And I think that we've fed all of their brains enough with working with getting your venue out there, get it constructed in time. So what's like the last tip you have for people?
So the last tip I have, and I always think I should say this first, but that is the structure of your venue business. And this, of course, includes a lot of things, but this is the actual structure and the back-end admin way. The back-end admin side of the way your venue business will run. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not something you need to work on when you start selling. You need to have this done before you start pre-selling. So once you're starting to build, and this can even be something you start to think about at the beginning, and you should, but this is what contracts do you need to have in place? How are you going to manage all of your clients and the communication with your clients? What is your communication policy? What is, how much are you going to charge? How are you taking those payments? And I truly mean how, like physically, how are you collecting money? Mm-hmm. How are you refunding if you need to? These are all things that you have to think about. And the structure really needs to be in place before you start pre-selling, because the minute you start touring people on your venue is the minute you start communicating with them and having a really solid and strong client communication communication practice from beginning to end is what's going to really, it's one of the things that's going to make or break your venue. And it's something that Katie and I are super passionate at our venue because we just want people to have all the information in an easily digestible way. And so the back end of our business works pretty seamlessly. And so I always want to encourage venue owners that this needs to be set up. It should really be one of the things you focus on the most. Again, yes, you're going to get to do all the fun things. Yes, you're going to get to decorate, but really this is going to impact your clients the most. And
Totally.
So it has to be solid.
Yes, I could go on and on about this. I have 2 points to kind of interject here. And I think this is from working 8 years as a professional wedding photographer in Montana and also being an attorney, which is crazy now that these two intersect, especially with venues. So Kinsey, I have looked over and I have had not necessarily brides come to me, but I specifically remember a wedding planner that I had a really good relationship with. She came to me and was like, hey, Paige, my clients have kind of a nightmare situation with their venue owner because of their contracts and the communication and it's all falling apart. Would you mind looking at this contract? And the point here is this contract was it was not good. We'll just stop there. And it gave the clients no rights and all of these things. And they felt like that was their experience with the venue. And it was such a poor experience that they ended up backing out. And then again, it's just a trickle domino effect. I know people here in the industry, obviously this wedding planner is referring people to, and she'll never refer to this venue again. And so again, that's just not a good business model to present to your clients.
Right.
And then the second thing I was going to say is with just brides in particular, and this is just very simple, and any of you wedding photographers out there will probably agree with me here, is I have waited for people to book, obviously because of their venue. You usually as a bride-to-be, and I'm a bride-to-be right now, so obviously I'm going to book my venue first and my date first before I book my photographer. Usually that's always second. And the thing is if you don't have good client communication, I mean, I'm not a venue owner, but what I know from photographer's standpoint is they will bypass 4 different venues if you don't communicate with them well, if you do not get back to them, if you don't send over a contract quick enough, because they're just trying to book their date. And you want to sell yourself to them. It's funny. I don't understand, Kinsey, maybe you can elaborate here. What is it with venue owners and they just don't do things the way that a lot of us pitch ourselves to our clients? We're all pitching to the same bride and groom or bride and bride or groom, these partners. We're all pitching to our clients, but venue owners, I feel they're just yeah, we've got the property. We own you. I don't know. They're we're better than everyone else and it doesn't matter. And we don't have to have this good system, but I would think that that's what drives them to the ground.
That's a loaded question. And well, number one, I was actually just I was on somebody else's podcast. Her name is Megan Gilligan. She runs Weddings for Real, another great podcast. But I was telling her, and I feel this way, that a lot of times in the industry, and it's happening right now with you, that there are vendors. So someone says wedding vendors in the industry, and that means photographers, planners, calligraphers, designers, floral designers, all the people. And then there's venue owners.
Yes. I totally agree. They're over here in a different bubble.
And that's how we talk about them, right? And that's because I pardon my language here, but I think because historically venues have been a pain in the ass. And and that's true. And that I say that with all the love in my heart. And I can say that because I am a venue owner. And I think 2 things. Number one, I think that there is an amazing crop of privately owned venues that has really been coming up in the last 3 to 4 to 5 years. And I think a lot of people are running amazing private venues because they adore their clients. They want to work with other vendors. They want to be a source of information and a good resource. And then I also think that there's not people like that, but there's not people like that in all industries.
True.
And I think also too, the other thing that might be happening with venues specifically, and this is kind of a carryover from, mostly only being able to choose between hotels and banquet rooms and all of this, is that some of the venues we see have venue managers and they are not as invested in the business as the owner is. And they're just the manager, right? They're there to follow whatever contract you signed. And that's kind of all they can wrap their brain around. And everything else is just, it's not up to them. We hear that a lot. And again, that's not a razz. I don't mean that in a mean way, but we hear that a lot from the vendors at our venue. They just say, wow, you're so helpful. This is the best venue I've ever been to.
Right.
The last time I was at a venue, they like unlocked it and then sat in their office until 11 o'clock at night. And that's okay. Like that's fine if that's working for your venue. I don't mean to say that that's not okay, but there's a difference between a person who owns a venue and who's really invested in the client, just as invested as the photographer and the planner,
right.
and a difference between somebody who's just there to run the shell that the wedding is part of. So I think that's kind of the main thing. And I think that's all I'll say about that.
I know you and I could go on and on and on about this.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people doing well. And I think that we'll continue to see people who are running really awesome venues. And then the people who are not will naturally weed themselves out.
Right. And what Kinsey, I mean, you're trying to just pitch here and like tell people is you have to have good contracts. You have to have some client management system in place.
That's right.
And you have to communicate well with your clients and have your workflow and systems ready to go before you start bringing on clients. And I think this is just a really good general business advice for everyone listening in, because you don't want to give one client one experience and the next client a different experience. Obviously, it's going to like evolve over time and you're going to get better and better, but you don't just want to like start out with nothing. And especially with a venue where you're like having people on and there's legalities and, people are coming onto a property and you're bringing hundreds of people to like your location and those type of things. So that's why all of that needs to be wrapped up in like good one-on-ones with your client and a good contract.
That's right. And I think really quickly, I'll just touch on something you said because it reminded me. And I think one of the things with venue owners is that, and this kind of goes back to a venue being a bigger investment than it is just to start, and I don't mean this as it's not, I don't mean this as it's not expensive or you're not investing. I just mean that quite literally it is more expensive to start a wedding venue than it is to start a planning company or a photography business.
Right.
But I think that kind of goes back to why venues seem a little bit more, quote, aggressive in their contracts than other vendors. And that's because we take on more liability. And I don't apologize for my contract. It's pretty solid and it is more in favor of the venue, but that's because I'm hosting 200 of your closest friends in an open bar. And you know what I'm saying? Like the photographer is not responsible for that. The planner is not liable for that. No one else is liable for that except for me. And so I don't apologize for that, but I'm also not secretive about it. And that's the problem. When you don't understand your contract as a venue and you are secretive about it, and most importantly, you're not confident about what it is, that is the problem. I mean, I said that to someone who booked our wedding venue. They told me like, this contract seems really one-sided. And I was like, listen, it is. And I'm not sorry for that because we take on more liability than you do. But it's also why I require you to have special event insurance so that you can recoup costs if you need to. So I'm looking out for you, but I'm not ashamed or sorry that I'm also looking out for this, 7-figure building.
Right. Exactly. No, that makes total sense. And Kins, this is a really good transition too into what I do like at the end of every Legal Page podcast is we have phenomenal guests on like yourself that teach our listeners about something very specific. And this is perfect because I always like to ask like a big legal lesson you've learned on your business journey. And particularly for you being a wedding venue owner and teaching people about like starting a wedding venue. I think the one thing that I think would really like help people here is we've talked about like legalities of, county regulations and building and permits and all those things. That's all legal stuff as well. But one of the things that you mentioned that I would love for you to kind of chat about here is obviously your contract is one-sided for purposes of, making you have a lot of liability as a business owner. And then you are bringing people on. There's an open bar. Like this is talked about a lot. We don't need to get into this, but this is talked about a lot in the wedding industry is like who like is bearing the risk and these type of things. But what would happen like as a venue owner if someone like if it wasn't a good fit and you had already booked out this client, like, I mean, what venues book out 12, 18 months in advance, if not longer. And you had mentioned that you had a not so good situation with a client, but your contract kind of saved you. And so in that respect with your contract, can you just chat a little bit about how as a venue owner, yes, you need to protect against liability and risk and all of these things, but what about just like these cancellation and rescheduling situations with clients?
That's a good question. So what happened with us specifically, or let me back up for just a second. I think that sounded kind of scary that I was like, my contract is one-sided and it's our way or the highway. It is one-sided in the sense that some of the pieces are, if you damage our venue, we will charge you. It's not confusing, but I think that really nicely into this example, which is every single requirement, every policy that we have is listed in our contract in black and white in plain English. That is like number one. I don't have any legalese or legal speak in my contract because nobody understands that. They don't understand what they're signing. And I don't feel comfortable explaining it because unless I actually talked to a lawyer and said, hey, how do I explain this? But then what's the point of having it written that way? I'm just going to say it the way they're going to understand it. And then also my clients initial after every section in my contract. And so it doesn't mean that it's like, quote, more legal. It just means that now I have a contract that says after every section, you have initialed. So by you initialing, you've told me that you've read this. It says initial here, I have read, understood, and agree with the above or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, so we had this situation in 2018 where a client was not responding to our many emails. And one of the clauses in my contract is that the client, for the duration of their engagement and contract with the venue, agrees to regularly check their email because that's how we communicate. And so this person was not responding to our emails. They were not responding to any phone calls. Their wedding was coming up really quickly, probably like 30 days in advance. Maybe it was 30 or 45 days. And I was just panicking. Yeah. We hadn't talked to them. Anyway, long story short is I finally got a hold of the bride and I said, listen, your damage deposit is way past due. I don't want to cancel your wedding, but I could, according to your contract. Like, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. It's the first time I've been able to get a hold of you in a few months. Like, I'm here for you. I want to be here for you, but you're making it hard.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short is she basically just said, well, we had some personal things happen. So I just stopped checking my email. Like, I didn't even know if we we're going to get married. And I was like, okay, that's nice, but that doesn't negate anything that's required at the venue. And so here's all of these things that you really need to have in. So what ended up happening with that is she did not have a wedding planner, which we require. She did not have or want to hire a professional bartender, which we also require. And she was late on paying her damage deposit, which we also require, of course. And so all of these things, after many, actually after a lot of concessions, which some venues wouldn't even offer this, but I offered to change her date to the following year because money had really become a factor for them. And I just said, listen, this seems really hard. I'm happy to change your date. Everything will the contract will still stand, but we could change your date and you could have more time to save up and all of this. She refused to hire a bartender. And so I was like, I'm sorry, but your wedding is canceled. I can't, your wedding's supposed to be in 20 days at this point. You refuse to honor the terms of your contract and we can't do this. So anyway, I canceled their wedding. I got a lot of phone calls from vendors in the area because apparently the groom, and I did not like this situation, but I'll kind of share this. I will share this openly with you guys because it happened to us. And it, if it happens to you, here's what. So apparently the groom worked for a construction company and the owner of that construction company. So very much fourth party, not even involved in this situation at all. He ended up calling me probably 3 or 4 times because he found out randomly that this groom had his wedding canceled by me. And I was like, I'm sorry, who are you in this situation?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I felt actually I'm not going to say I felt harassed, but I kind of did by this guy who was randomly calling me and he was like, well, I'm their representative. And I said, cool. You need to read the 80 emails I've exchanged with them and their contract and then call me back. And I'm happy to talk with you. But it's really clear to me you haven't done that. And he goes, well, I think you just need to treat people on a case-by-case basis. And I was like, do you do that in your construction business? So anyway, we were able to cancel that wedding. They did try to come back to us and emailed us and said, we're going to contact a lawyer. We want a full refund. And so what happened was, and this is where my contract saved me at the initial question. I'm sorry, I told you that long story, but the initial question, this is where my contract saved me. I just highlighted all of the pieces of the contract that she clearly violated. I attached the emails that she had sent to me where she refused to abide by that piece of the contract. And I sent all of that to her in a PDF. And I said, here's your contract. Here's the email where you said you're not going to abide by that. And here's the section where it says I can cancel your wedding for any one of these things, not to mention all 4 of these things. Mm-hmm. So let me know if you have any questions. Here's my lawyer's email address. You can contact them. And they never contacted us. Right. Yeah, nothing ever moved forward. They canceled. I don't know what happens with them. They didn't leave us a bad review. I mean, if they would have, I would have, made this situation really clear. I would have gotten it removed. And so anyway, I think that in my opinion, and I don't know for sure, but I think in my opinion that our contract really saved us in that situation. And also I think too, just being a human being, because I mentioned that I made a lot of concessions. I said, okay, you can, even though this is all overdue, I'll still allow you to turn it in. If you could do it by, in 2 weeks at 5 p.m. on Friday, July, whatever, like I will help you. Here's all of our vendor recommendations, which we'd already given to them. Mm-hmm. I will let you turn in your damage deposit late. I will let you do this. I will let you change your date, because I understand that sometimes life happens and I'm still a person. I'm a business owner, but I'm a human. I get it. So I think in combination with being a compassionate business owner, but also having a really solid contract helped us get out of that situation.
Yeah, I love everything you said. I think the biggest thing that I can add here, and just the takeaway for everyone listening in is, you're not the only one, Kinsey, that has had a conversation with me at the end of their podcast recording where we talk about how their contract saved them and that they felt so secure and protected by their contract that they were able to have a very, very different client experience in that type of sticky situation. And so my biggest takeaway here is, you guys, like, before any of this happens, be proactive. If you're feeling like your contract is not something that you could stand up like next to and argue on your side and like why it protects you and why you have all of these rights and how they breached the contract, yada, yada. Like, you need to go get your contract reviewed by an attorney. You need to bulk it up, add some things into it. You want to be so secure with your contract that if something were to occur, you could be in a situation, and this is going to be kind of like, well, this is going to be very black and white. But what I'm trying to say is, like, you want to be able to be like, okay, yeah, sue me. Good luck. And that is how I want you to feel with your contracts. And Kinsey, of course, there's like, you want to humanize that. Of course. And that's what you're saying. Like, be a kind human, be a person, like, and not just like a robot with your contract. And you had concessions, you were trying so hard, but at the end of the day, you needed your contract to protect you.
That's right.
So that's the biggest takeaway that I have for people here is, if you don't feel that way, and again, Kinsey's not the only person that has said this. Like, I have had bad situations in an unfortunate client experience, and I was able to use my contract in a way that protected myself from any type of legal issue that could have occurred. And that's really awesome, Kinsey. It's really interesting how you went about that. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I would say too, the other thing that really, not even just with the client, but I shared that situation about that, random 4th person removed construction owner, because that my contract also helped me feel in control of that situation. I was not expecting to get an aggressive phone call from a strange man. And I felt so in control because of my contract, because it said what it needed to say. It was clear. Here's the key. I understood it. Mm-hmm. I understood what it said. And so I felt in control of that conversation, even though, he's a major business owner in a, popular town in Aspen. I felt very in control. And here, the other thing I didn't mention is that I got other phone calls from like a wedding planner and someone else who were like, why did you do this? Strangers to me. And I was just like, why are you calling me? You don't even understand the situation. I don't even know you. But anyway, I felt very confident and very comfortable. And I just said, kept repeating that line to people. I said, listen, it sounds like you're invested in this couple. We are too. Read the contract and all of our communication, and then call me back if you have any questions.
I love you. I also just like the fact that we're just going so gung-ho into contracts right now is making me so happy. No, don't apologize.
I just believe in it so much.
Everyone listening, don't ever apologize for your contract.
Don't.
And it should be rock solid. It should be like very clear, concise, and understandable, like you said, Kinsey. And it needs to make sure that it protects you. Also protects the client in their some situations, but really protects you because it's your contract. That's the whole point of it. Okay, so enough about that. Kinsey, you have just been a wealth of information today. Thank you so much for coming on here. We are going to link Kinsey's freebie about finding property and like kind of the stages to look through realty wise. And Kinsey, is there anything else that we will be linking that you would like to share with people?
No, not really. She creates business all over the internet. I respond to Instagram DMs a lot easier than I respond to emails. So come find me on Instagram, DM me, tell me about your venue dreams, your questions. If you're a venue owner and you just want to talk to another venue owner, I'm here for you. So Paige, this has really been such a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for coming on. You guys, if you want any further information, just shecreatesbusinesspodcast.com. I know she has a shop on there with tons of like further information if you're looking for it. And we'll, of course, Kinsey, make sure that we link you so people can reach out to you if they have any further questions. But thank you so much for giving your time to us today. It's been awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paige.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.